Hello and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind. My name is Hannah. I'll be your host for this evening. The divisional round is over. The top four teams are now decided who's going to fight for the championship, trophy, and who's going to be heading to the Super Bowl. We're going to be reviewing the top storylines of the games gone. So let's get into it.
I just want to rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Still, as you can see, if you're watching, it's only the best two this week. Unfortunately, no Paul, but hopefully we'll have him back by next week. But thankfully, I'm joined by the fantastic Lewis. Lewis, how was your weekend? Did you enjoy the divisional games?
It was good. It was great fun. I actually managed to watch all four, somewhat not intentionally, because obviously it means staying up until like 4 o'clock in the morning here in the UK. But it was great fun. I definitely think. I mean, it was really interesting on the first day. The games, so the 49ers game being closer than we thought, and then just kind of being thrown away by Jordan Love at the end, and then the mirroring with Baker the day afterwards. The Texans Ravens game was a little bit sad because that was the only one where you're like, okay, there's just a real difference in quality between these teams. And then Chiefs Bills was really good fun. I found really interesting because obviously the history with Chiefs Bills and the playoff game from last year, which was one of the greatest games of all time. I felt like the commentary team was really desperate to make out like this was as well. And it was good. It was a good game. There was a lot of back and forth. I really enjoyed watching Jason Kelsey take his shirt off. But I don't know that it quite had the same level of drama and like sheer offensive output as last year. It was more kind of, okay, there's linebacking injuries. They're, able to gash them in the run game, and neither of the receivers seem to be able to make a catch. So they're just going to keep running. And okay, Josh Allen's running again, and yeah, Mahomes is throwing to Kelsey again. And I didn't think it was kind of the instant classic that the commentary team was trying to make it out to be. But it was generally a great weekend of football, and I think there's something nice about when your team's out and you can just sort of relax and enjoy. You're not really rooting for anyone. You're just able to sit back and watch and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I enjoy doing that. My problem is obviously the Bengals have this made rivalry with the Chiefs. Obviously, we beat them 2 years ago in the AFC Championship game. They beat us last year in the AFC Championship game and then won the Super Bowl. So just generally, the Bengals fan base just do not like the Chiefs.
Yeah.
And so I really did not want them to win. Like, I wanted them just to go out and then I could just sit and enjoy the rest. I'm like, obviously, I don't like the Ravens because they're an AFC North rival, but I would much rather the Ravens won the Super Bowl than the Chiefs. Like, that's how much we don't like the Chiefs.
I think everyone is kind of just a bit bored of the Chiefs. Like, Pat Mahomes has been a starter for 6 years, and he's made the AFC Championship game every single year, which is ridiculous. And like, we can't take for granted how good this player is. Like, the Chiefs were genuinely quite bad during the regular season, like really down the stretch. And then they get into the playoffs. When I was making my picks before the game, so I was 3 of 4 this week. I took the Bucks over the Lions, which could have happened. But when I was picking the Chiefs Bills game, I was like, I just can't not pick Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. Like, even though it's his, first ever road game, and even though the Bills were the hottest team in the NFL down the stretch, I just can't do it. But I think you see a lot of people rooting against the Chiefs. Just not. I mean, obviously the Bengals rivalry is one thing, but like, people are just really bored of watching the Chiefs win. People don't want to see it anymore. Like, people want the Ravens to take them down next weekend just because it's something different. It's a different team in the Super Bowl. So I get it. But I think it is quite fun watching Mahomes overcome the odds of a pretty bad receiver core and, Mecole Hardman trying to fumble away the game on multiple occasions.
But you would say that as an NFC team supporter, you say. In the AFC, true. I'm like, just get these out. I'm well fed up. But I think it's like the Patriots, isn't it? The Chiefs are the new Patriots from, the bygone era. Everyone was fed up of seeing Tom Brady getting in the AFC Championship game again.
Yeah.
and here we are again with Mahomes.
Yeah,
Good on him. He's overcome so much, hasn't he? It's amazing that somehow they turn it on in the playoffs every year and off they go. It is impressive. I can't like them. I just can't.
See, I'm now just anyone but the 49ers. That's my thing. And I mean, watching the 49ers Packers game, this is the problem. The 49ers can quite easily win the NFC every year because the talent gap is so big. But when you get into the Super Bowl against either Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, like arguably the two best quarterbacks in football, regardless of play level this year. Like you obviously have one, probably the last 2 years MVPs. When it comes down to it, and you're just putting the game on a quarterback's shoulders, and you have Brock Purdy. We're not rehashing the arguments about Brock Purdy, but you have Brock Purdy up against one of them. I know which one I'm betting on. Um, so I don't really mind if the 49ers make the Super Bowl, then fine. But I just can't see them win it. I just can't do it. I hate them so much.
See, that's like me and the Chiefs. Like the 49ers are your version of my Chiefs. I do think that game made them just look a bit fallible, didn't it? And I know it was a rain game and Petty doesn't play very well in the rain and whatever. But like, I didn't think that they, when you compare it to the Ravens Texans game, where you could just see that there was a talent gap,
Yeah.
I just didn't feel the same about that Packers 49ers game, if I'm
Yeah.
honest. And I think it made me question a little bit whether they are going to race, to win the Super Bowl. Ultimately, I think they probably will beat the Lions next week. I just think that Lions defense is going to fall on its
Yeah.
face at some point soon, and the 49ers are a good team to do that. But I think ultimately the AFC team, whoever gets in there, will likely win. I think if the Ravens get in, I think they definitely win.
Yeah.
I think if the Chiefs win, I think that's going to be a closer matchup just because of how that Chiefs team have been this year. They somehow managed to always pull it off in the playoffs, but I still have small question marks going in,
Yeah. I saw something about that Lions defense, which is that their yards allowed. I think this is right because I'm paraphrasing, but their yards allowed per play or per passing play in the playoffs would have been the league highest in the regular season. Like you just can't afford to play that way. I mean, look, they can, like they clearly can afford to play that way, but part of that came from missed penalties in the Rams game and red zone woes, and then ultimately Baker throwing the game away um, in the Bucks game a couple of days ago. So yeah, I can see the 49ers still just steamrolling the Lions. But I'm Ravens bandwagon now. Are you? I'm gonna guess that you're supporting the Lions the rest of the way if you could pick one of these four teams.
I think the Lions is the best story. I think it would be awesome
Yeah,
for them to win it. Like, I just think what a fantastic turnaround, that City hasn't had. They were on that, the graphic where it's like teams with the longest playoff game winning drought. They were on
yeah,
there, and all of a sudden this season they've turned it around and, they've made it to the
yeah,
NFC Championship game. And I just think it's an amazing story, similar. The Bengals did a similar-ish thing. It's not the same, but
yeah.
like it's that really nice like Cinderella run story, and I think it would be nice for them to finish it off. I just don't
Yeah.
think they're strong enough at the end of the day. But
No.
yeah, if it was down to me, I'd prefer an NFC team to win, obviously. But ultimately, may the best team win. And if the Ravens are the best, the Ravens are the best. I'm hoping that all of their coordinators get poached this off season, and then
Oh,
they've
they
got to
will.
start again. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that they will. I think. I mean, obviously, you don't get a lot of news on. Well, you get some interviews, but some teams will actually block interviews while they're still in contention. And we haven't really seen Mike McDonald and Todd Monken being interviewed a huge amount. But Todd Monken, I mean, Mike McDonald, I think, kind of goes without saying that defense has been the best in the NFL. But Todd Monken came into an offense that was terrible last. Well, not terrible, but really not accentuating Lamar's talents last year, um, and has revolutionized it and brought a lot of those college concepts and more ability to play with motion and to not just lean on the run game, but even when they are leaning on the run game, it's kind of more advanced rushing concepts than they were using previously under Greg Roman, whose playbook was still kind of stuck in the 80s. I wouldn't be surprised to see Todd Monken being linked with a few positions, which I haven't really seen too much. But yeah, I think it will be interesting, and that's a little bit of what we're talking about today. Is a few of it is going to be looking at kind of coordinators that could get poached and the effect that that could have on each team.
Yeah, I mean, should we dig into some big news since we're talking about coaches and everything? I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
one of the main things is the head coaching carousel is full on turning now, isn't it? And a couple of those seats have now been filled. Now, obviously, the first one was the Patriots. Jared Mayo is now taking over as the head coach. He's basically moving up from linebackers coach into that head coach position. They didn't even they didn't do any search. He'd had it written in his contract that he would succeed Bill Belichick, and ultimately that's what they did. And then obviously the Raiders made who was their interim head coach now into their full-time head coach. So I'm interested on your thoughts here, Lewis, on these. The main one I'm really interested in is the Patriots. Now, obviously they've hired internally. Jared Mayo has only ever been a Patriot, so he played as a Patriot, he coached as a Patriot. Like, he knows nothing else in the football world. I understand that he's done a lot of business stuff, which may help him, from a different way. But do you think keeping it internal and within, I suppose, what has been the Patriots, they say the Patriot way, but do you know what I mean? Within kind of that Patriot family, do you think that is a good idea? Do you think there's going to be any issues with that? What are your thoughts on this hire?
I would have had more of an issue with this if it was Josh McDaniels. So there were a lot of rumors going around. So at the time when he was like Colts head coach for a day and then went back to the Patriots, it seemed like the reasoning behind that was that he'd been promised that he was going to succeed Bill Belichick, and we've seen him now. Obviously, I mean, linked to what we're talking about elsewhere, that he's flamed out in Las Vegas. Went back to the Patriots and then left again. And it seems to me like it's clear that he thought he was going to be the successor and wasn't, so left town. Rob Mayer is interesting to me. I think the problem is that the Patriots have really struggled the last few years. It's not that Bill Belichick is going out on top and handing over to a successor to go after him. So I think it's not a case of like, things are going fantastically, so let's keep it the same. The problem is they really need to shake things up. So I think a lot of it is going to depend on what they do on the offensive side of the ball. The defense has always been all right, and obviously Mayo is a defensive coach. There's been reports coming through about a few of the interviews they're looking for in terms of offensive coordinators. So 2 assistants for the Rams, actually, Nick Cayley and Zach Robinson. So that's the tight ends coach and the quarterbacks coach from the Rams. Now, obviously, there are lots of coaches that have been poached from the Rams, and some of them have done pretty well around the league. So I wouldn't be hugely against that being the way that he looks to move forward. I think what I would like to see for sure is them making a point of handing the reins over to someone on the offensive side of the ball. So I think they need a quarterback at number 3 overall. I think that's the way that they're probably going to go. Mayo kind of teased in a press conference that they're gonna take the best available player for the biggest need on the team. Which, come on, that's quarterback, isn't it? So I think, to me, like, I don't hate going for an internal candidate, and I like the idea of succession planning, of making sure that when our all-time greatest head coach, and maybe the greatest head coach of all time, when he eventually goes, we know what we're doing next. I like having a plan, but I think it depends. Like, offense is where they've struggled. I think people would have liked it if they'd gone out and got one of these kind of hot offensive coordinators, Bobby Slowick, Ben Johnson, and obviously they haven't. They've stayed internally. They've stayed with a defensive head coach. So I think it's going to really make a difference what that OC hire looks like, and what they try to do on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I'm really interested as well how they're going to sort their front office, because obviously Belichick did a lot of that kind of stuff, in the latter kind of stages of his tenure there, and it didn't go particularly well these last few seasons. And I think one of the reasons that they're in this position is because they drafted so poorly, over the last few years. For me, the thing that would worry me about taking a quarterback at 3 is that, what pieces do they have on that offense? Yes, okay, Ramondre, wow. Maybe Hunter Henry. I don't even know, he might be out of contract this year.
He's a free agent, yeah.
So, like, who is he throwing it to? Like, is he going to end up in a, Bryce Young situation where he has nobody? And then who and how is that developing, a quarterback? I totally get they need one. Like, they don't really have anybody on the roster, but can they do a fill-in this year with Jacob? Can they take Marvin Harrison Jr.? Ultimately, we think that quarterback's going to go 1 and 2. So Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be sitting there for you to take. So do you take Marvin Harrison Jr. this year? Do you try stick it together? Jacoby Brissett has history at the Patriots. He was drafted by them originally.
Yep.
Do they take him for a year as like a, stick him in for a year? They're not going to be particularly good because they've got so many holes. I mean, that defense I know is always good, but still, I just don't think they'll have enough of that offense to drag them anywhere. Then do they look for a quarterback next season?
Yeah. Do you try and wait for Arch Manning down the line? I think the big thing for me, so they have at this point the fourth most projected cap space in the league. So obviously the question is, do you take the best player in the draft in Marvin Harrison Jr. at 3 and let him, struggle for a year? I think I posed this question on Twitter the other day to say, is that the worst possible landing spot for him? Being, I mean, he might get 150 targets from Brissett or Jimmy G or whoever it is ends up there. Or do you take the third best quarterback, whether that's Jaden Daniels? That's kind of who's projected to be the QB3 at the minute. And then in terms of like the wide receiver free agents, because then you go, oh, okay, brilliant, you've got a load of cap room, you can go and get some really exciting free agents to fill around him. But who, like, so the big name free agents currently, you've got T Higgins and Michael Pittman. Pittman definitely won't hit free agency. I don't know about Higgins.
No, he won't. They'll tag him. There's no way. Maybe next year, maybe, but definitely not this year.
Yeah. Then you've got Mike Evans wants to go to a contender. OBJ probably isn't going to leave the Ravens. Curtis Samuel, maybe. Tyler Boyd would be a good player, actually. Michael Thomas, DJ Chark. Oh, the names. Then Hollywood Brown, Calvin Ridley. There you go. But then it starts to get really gross immediately. So there are some players you could go and get, but it's not. It's the Panthers going out and getting DJ Chark and Adam Thielen. It's there's no one that you say, well, there you go, we're going to get Jaden Daniels and we're going to get him as wide receiver 1. You're getting a quarterback and then letting them. You're saying you're letting them develop, but what are you actually going to be able to do to develop them if all they have is Pop Douglas to throw to for the rookie season?
But and this is what always worries me about rookie quarterbacks. I do think, confidence is a massive, massive thing. And I think if you put them in a bad situation, ultimately you're just not going to allow them to develop into the potential, NFL quarterback that they could be. And I'm worried that Bryce Young has been ruined now, from this season. And ultimately, I think if he'd have gone into a much better situation, I think he would be playing much better and be doing well. I personally think that, like we say in fantasy, draft, for value, not for need. And ultimately, I feel like if you're taking a quarterback at 3, you're taking it because you feel you need a quarterback, not because the quarterback's the best player on the board.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know this quarterback class particularly well, but from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, Lewis, there's 2 quarterbacks at the top, Caleb Williams and Drake May, and then it's kind of a mishmash of others, and I guess it's pick your poison kind of. But are they good enough to sit as the number 3? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think it's actually slightly different. So I think you have Caleb Williams and Drake May at the top, who I could see an argument for either way. Whichever you choose to have as your one. Then I think it's Jaden Daniels, who was a Heisman Trophy winner, as like a clear three on his own. And then I think you get into the sort of JJ McCarthy's, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and kind of the rest ofs who could potentially go towards the end of the first, but they're not going to be a third overall pick. So I think Jaden Daniels is fine at the 103. I mean, if you're just saying, if the argument you're making is who is the better player at their position right now, the argument is Marvin Harrison Jr. But if you're just saying, look, we need to get a quarterback, like we can't go into another season with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi starting at quarterback. We just have to go and get someone. Then I think the answer is you take the quarterback. And look, if you're bad enough, if you take Marvin Harrison Jr. and you're bad enough, you can draft the quarterback again next year. Although the 25 QB class isn't as good as this one. But if you draft a quarterback and they're pretty terrible, you can also draft one again next year. We've seen it obviously with the Cardinals a few years ago, replacing Josh Rosen with Kyler Murray. So there's nothing stopping you from going out and taking someone else if you try it with Jaden Daniels and it doesn't go to plan. To me, like I don't like the idea of like, well, we're going to get things perfect for the quarterback and then we're going to drop the quarterback in, because I think the way, especially the AFC is now, we were talking earlier about all those super weapons. If you don't have an elite quarterback, it's just not going to happen. So to me, I would just keep swinging on quarterbacks until you're sure that you have one. And then once you have one, then you can fill the team around them. You can be kind of trying to do that over time as well. But I think to me, like they just have to get quarterback right, and trying it out with Jaden Daniels, especially like a rushing quarterback who has a slightly higher floor coming in terms of being able to move the ball. I think I would go with him at 103.
Yeah, I get that. I just worry. I just think, ultimately all of these elite quarterbacks have dropped into good situations. Mahomes, Allen, Lamar.
Well, Allen wasn't. The Bills weren't amazing when they drafted Josh Allen. And I mean, the Bengals weren't either until he then got Jamar Chase the year after. But
Yeah, but he tore his ACL in the interim period.
So you were
because the
able
team
to
was
get
so bad.
you were able to get the fourth overall pick again.
Because it was so bad that they let him get beat up.
Yeah, I think there's an argument that I think you can let a quarterback elevate the situation. But I would rather have one than not, and I'd rather just keep trying.
Yeah, I just think you really, like you say, I guess you don't know who's elite until you get in there, but I just feel like you really have to have the right quarterback there to do that. I think 9 times out of 10 you're going to ruin a quarterback over, them elevating you. At this stage. But like you say, what's a swing and a miss?
Exactly.
Go again. So
Exactly.
We'll see. Anything to say on Antonio Pierce, Lewis? I mean, I don't really know much about him. That the players were really vocal about having him as their head coach. They obviously seem to connect to him and really like him. But again, I guess the next question is who's going to be on the offensive side, isn't it? Who's going to be the coordinator? What they're going to do at quarterback?
Well, that's the big thing. I mean, he's another linebackers coach actually. So both teams hiring internally with a linebackers coach. The Raiders finished 5-4 to finish the season, and 3 of those 4 losses were to playoff teams, and 2 of those 3 losses were by 3 points. So the Raiders locker room kind of really rallied around Antonio Pierce, and he seems a really good speaker. He seems like someone that can really kind of motivate the players. It's a similar type of question in terms of, okay, well, things are not great at the minute. The Raiders actually, I mean, they won all those games at the end of the season. They kind of could have done with not, because they're now picking at 13th overall, whereas at one point I know they were picking I think as high as the 5th overall pick, and they could probably do with that now. to potentially actually be in the mix to go up and get a quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised to see them move up to get one. I don't know that Aidan O'Connell is the answer. We know that Jimmy G isn't. They have the 11th most cap in the NFL currently, but they also have a lot of free agents on the offensive line. They can get rid of Jimmy G, so they can cut him post June 1st to save another 12 million. They can trade him for 11 million or 24 after June 1st, but I don't think a team's going to agree to that. So you could potentially see Jimmy G go back to the Patriots. It wouldn't surprise me. It's the quarterback question, the offensive line question. The weapons are actually good. Obviously, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers is good. Josh Jacobs and Zamir White are both good. You know, there's talent there that they can work around. It just depends that they're losing 3 starters on the offensive line as free agents, and Aidan O'Connell showed some flashes, but I don't know enough that you can commit to him next year. It wouldn't surprise me if there are another team that kind of went out and got that bridge type quarterback to battle it out with AOC in the preseason, and then you've got someone you can fall back on, and then you look again in future. I mean, there could also be a player in kind of going out to try and get Russell Wilson, or even Justin Fields, which doesn't really seem to get talked about a huge amount. But they could be players in that sweepstake as well. But I think it's all quarterback and offensive line for the Raiders at the minute.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can say Aidan O'Connell's going to be anything. I mean, maybe he will, but I doubt it at this stage.
Yeah.
I don't think he did enough last season. I mean, this is a team where actually probably could drop a rookie in, and not totally ruin them. He's got some weapons. Yes, maybe the O-line needs a bit of work, but that there are pieces there that can help him through that rookie season. So, I'd feel much more comfortable them going up and grabbing someone than the Patriots at this point, where there's literally, duct tape, of different puppet figure, skill position players because they're so terrible.
Yeah.
So, this is a kind of team I'd feel much more confident to drop a rookie in and feel like they're not going to be totally ruined within a season and never play, well again. So, I think there's going to be some really, really interesting narratives this off-season and plenty more seats to fill yet. So plenty more for us to discuss moving forward. Shall we finally get to our games, Lewis, and do a little bit of a chat about those from, generally and also from kind of a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, let's crack on.
So should we go in order? Let's start Ravens-Texans. So my kind of musings or thoughts or questions initially for this Ravens team for next season was going to be, what are they going to do at running back? So obviously J.K. Dobbins tore his Achilles. They didn't give him a contract extension. In the off season, he wouldn't turn up to activities. He wasn't happy, blah, blah, blah. He wanted an extension. They didn't give him it. Kind of lucky for them. Obviously, we never want a player to get injured. However, unfortunately with his injury, they're kind of, lucky that they didn't give him a contract extension because they'd be paying a lot of money, and potentially, Achilles injuries can cause long-term issues. Cam Akers, etc. as examples. I've got Gus Edwards. I think I don't even know, is anybody on the books apart from our friend the rookie
Keaton Mitchell. Yeah, so Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and Keaton Mitchell are all still there next season. Gus Edwards and Justice Hill will be 1-year deals, and Keaton Mitchell, obviously he tore his ACL in week 15, so there's even a question of whether or not he's going to be healthy for the regular season. J.K. Dobbins, I would be surprised if he's re-signed. You mentioned Achilles and ACL injuries obviously being kind of career-ending for running backs, and this is his second Achilles. So I can't see it working out for him. I think he'll end up becoming a free agent. To me, obviously on the roster currently they have Dalvin Cook, but he's not the answer. There's so many running backs going into free agency currently, and this is something that we're gonna kind of continue to touch upon throughout the show today about the free agent running back market. They were linked quite heavily with Derrick Henry as a trade candidate during the regular season, but then current free agents, Derek Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler, Devin Singletary, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, Ezekiel Elliott, Rashard Penny, AJ Dillon, Antonio Gibson, like Zach Moss. There's plenty of, I mean, there's plenty of starters on there. There's plenty of like borderline elite talents on there. So, if someone like Tony Pollard or Josh Jacobs or Saquon Barkley hit the free agent market, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Ravens go out and target. I also wouldn't be surprised to see them go and target Derrick Henry, because it seemed like that was what they wanted to do um, during the regular season, and just couldn't quite make it happen. Um, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them go and target one of those big ticket free agent running backs.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just don't. Their plan was not to have Gus Edwards, this kind of mix of Gus Edwards, Hill, and then obviously when Keaton Mitchell was healthy, Keaton Mitchell. Like ultimately, I think the plan was to have more of a lead guy, potentially in Dobbins, and then obviously these other guys mixing in. Injuries every season have been an issue for them at running back, and ultimately, I think they want more of an answer. It'll be interesting to see if they get someone in free agency. My understanding, again, I don't know much about this class this year, but my understanding is there's not that many great options in the draft this year. So maybe this is a free agent kind of year for them. But I don't think they're going to carry on as they are, with these players, because I don't think ultimately that's what they wanted, this off season. And they got stuck with it, and I think they're going to try and upgrade. I think moving forward,
I think that will be the plan. I think they need someone, and I think the answer isn't on the roster. I mean, I also wouldn't be surprised if they were to go. I've seen some people potentially link them with Zeke, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them go relatively cheap, because that's the way they tend to build the roster. And maybe they think Keaton Mitchell's the answer, and they'll just wait for him to get healthy. And Gus Edwards every season somehow gets it done. So maybe they'll just keep it going. But then if they win the Super Bowl, which currently I think they're the favourites to, then you have, it's in your best interest to kind of keep everything going in the same way.
Yeah, although it doesn't always work, does it? Doing that the second year, I personally think ultimately they need to do something there. I think Keaton Mitchell's a great complementary back, but I don't think you can possibly think that he, is going to be the guy. And if they do, I think I would be a bit worried about that. So I'll be interested to see what they decide to do ultimately. But yeah, I just think at some point Gus Edwards isn't going to be able to get it done anymore. And surely that must be coming, I think, relatively soon. The Texans obviously got outplayed this week. They were a great story, but they are still rebuilding at this point. It's only one draft class, and things have started to turn around, but they've still got lots of work to do. And I know, Lewis, you were having a think about this offense and Bobby Slowick, and whether him leaving could have a massive effect on this offense next season. What are your thoughts there?
So Bobby Slowick and Ben Johnson, to me, are kind of the top candidates for the head coaching cycle, in terms of like huge, successful, like young, successful offensive coordinators who, are really ready to take the step up and have led fantastic offenses this season. And I kind of think both of those teams, I don't know how prepared they are to lose them. Especially with the Texans, obviously they have a rookie head coach and a rookie offensive coordinator and a rookie quarterback, and everything has just fallen into place and worked. Like the defense has really come on. CJ Stroud's been fantastic, but part of that is Slowick as well. And you just think he must have been so instrumental in the success of CJ Stroud this season, and in kind of bringing that 49ers scheme to the Texans. So I think they could be in trouble if they lose him kind of goes a bit too far, because the crucial thing is CJ Stroud has also been unbelievable. And I don't want to say that everything kind of comes down to the play calling and the play design and everything that's set up, by the coach, instead of saying that the player is responsible. I think they could take a step back next year, depending on who they get to replace him as OC. But to me, like CJ Stroud emerging as a super weapon, I think they'll probably be fine regardless who they have at offensive coordinator.
Yeah, do you know, for me, I think that Ben Johnson did the right thing last off season when he said, because he'd only, similar to Bobby Slowick, he'd been offensive coordinator for just one season. Obviously,
Yeah.
everyone was like, wow, you've done an amazing job, can be a head coach. And he was like, no, I'm going to stick with what I'm doing, and then next off season, we'll, review. And obviously, he's getting loads and loads of head coaching interviews. I would be very surprised if he didn't end up somewhere. I think at the moment, he's favourite to land that Washington job, which I think would be great fun. Wouldn't it be awesome to finally see Terry McLaurin being decently fantasy relevant if they can get a quarterback, stuff like that. Maybe Jahan Dotson can actually do something this season, and all sorts of bits like that. But I think this personally, now I don't know Bobby Slowick personally, but I think potentially this is too early for him. One season as OC is not particularly long to then suddenly becoming head coach with like so many more responsibilities. Ultimately, I think what would be best for him and for the Texans would be for him to stay another season, give Stroud a bit more time, continue to build his offense and his offensive style, and then ultimately next season, move on. I suppose the thing is, it's dependent on what seats are available, If ultimately all the other seats get filled and then he gets offered Carolina, I'm pretty sure he's probably going to say, no, thanks, I'll stay with the Texans, So maybe if he gets a decent offer, he will leave. But I personally think it would be best for him and the Texans to stay. Ultimately, I think he's got everything he can from the players on that offense, which is what you want from an offensive coordinator, isn't it? But I think ultimately with a few more weapons next season, him and that offense would do really awesome things. I think Singletary has, he's played, well, and to his kind of talent, but they really need someone else in there now.
That's such a backhanded compliment to a player who's played really well. He's played well for his talent, He's done all right considering he's not great.
I mean, he has, but in that game, and maybe it was just the Ravens defense, pummeling that. But he just ran into that line of scrimmage again. A first down, boom. Oh, 2nd and 10, boom. 2nd and 10. Like every time, and I was like, this is.
Yeah, but then we saw in London this year, and watching it live was really interesting. Aside from the one 81-yard run that he broke, we saw Derrick Henry just kind of get stifled by the Ravens' offensive line over and over and over. Oh, sorry, defensive line over and over and over again. So, like, I think part of it. I mean, I think it took Bobby Slowick. There was a bit at the beginning of the game, but I was like, is he trying to tank his head coaching interviews because he just keeps calling 1st and 10 running plays and getting at most back to the line of scrimmage. And like, you've got a super weapon at quarterback, like use that to try and march down the field. So I think the problem was a little bit in the play calling at the beginning of this game. And less Singletary. I think he'll be back probably on a 1 or 2 year deal to the Texans, but I also think I wouldn't surprise me if they've drafted someone on day 2. And there's some decent day 2 running backs in this class. There's just not, an absolute stud to go and get in the first round. And like I mean, it's someone that I've been out on for a while, but Dameon Pierce is done, isn't he? Dameon Pierce's time in being fantasy relevant was basically just last season, basically, or the season before. That was basically it for Pierce. I think this is it for him.
Yeah, I do as well. Which it seems like a massive shame. He seemed to do okay when he played last season, but I think ultimately he doesn't fit the scheme there, and it hasn't really gone well. But I'm sure we can talk a lot more about kind of these Texans as we're getting into the off-season. Again, plenty to discuss. Let's move on to the 49ers Packers. You've got a question, I guess, that you were musing over about the 49ers, Lewis.
Yeah, and I was looking through, so I did an article on the website this week about players who I think are currently overvalued by the dynasty community. And one of them that I mentioned was Saquon Barkley, saying about him going into his age 27 season. And it just got me thinking about looking at the 49ers in particular. Is CMC the only running back over 27, 28? You know, the running backs in that group that you're like, oh, they're aging now. Is he the only one that you are actively happy to roster? With most of these players, like say if I own Alvin Kamara in quite a few places, or Aaron Jones on the other side, and yeah, they can win me weeks, but like I'm kind of, if anyone was to offer me a first for them, I'd sell immediately. Like I'll play them while I have them, and I won't sell them for nothing. But if I get a decent offer, I'm gonna sell. But I think CMC might be the only running back at that age that you're genuinely just happy to have him. So is he the only one, the only kind of aging running back you're happy to roster? And if you did own him, what would you consider selling him for in Dynasty?
I mean, thinking about it, he has to be the only guy, right? You know, players like Nick Chubb, who's got a massive injury, Derrick Henry's just getting older, you know, the cliff, it has to be imminent. I know he keeps just running and running and running, but it's got to come.
Yeah,
it really does.
He's 30 now.
Yeah, Aaron Jones makes me nervous now. Like, he's had a really good second half of the season, but he was injured for most of the first half of the season. Again, that cliff is coming, right? Yes, the answer is yes. CMC is the only running back over 28 that I'm happy to roster. You know, if I had my choice, it would be young running backs and just keep turning over the running back spot, you know, unless I had a CMC or, you know, one of those guys, you know, the Jets running back or potentially Bijan. I think with a new head coach, hopefully he's going to, you know, become fully fantasy relevant in that running back one kind of, you know, like if I haven't got any of those kind of top 5 running backs, then I'm just churning it over, you know, at the bottom of my roster. Like, I'm not putting lots of capital into it. What would I sell CMC for? This is a massive question, and I think everybody's going to have a different answer. You know, ultimately, CMC was basically a league winner this year, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I'm going to be saying too expensive, but I would want 2 firsts.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone would ever want to buy him for 2 firsts. Would you be buying CMC at this stage of his life for 2 firsts?
Oh, absolutely not. I actually had an offer. So I made a deal in a league where I sold T. Higgins for it was for Amari Cooper and a 24 first. And the guy, I mean, T. Higgins then obviously was injured. So the guy's team was struggling. And he offered me back. So he offered me CMC for that first and my first from the year afterwards. And I looked at it and I went, I mean, I won the title in that league anyway, you know, and I didn't make the deal. But I just kind of looked at it and went, I don't know that I want to, even if it's CMC, he just scares me because running backs at that age do just scare me. That I agree with you. I wouldn't sell him for any less, but I don't think I'd buy him for that amount either. So I think it's a really tough one where I think I think I'm not going to buy him anywhere, but also if I owned him, I probably wouldn't sell him because I don't think you're going to get enough that you're hugely happy with, because I think people are always going to try and buy low. And if you have CMC in your roster, you can win a title. Like, you need average play around him or average scores around him to win the title that season. So yeah, I don't know that the market value means that I'd ever sell him or buy him, because I think I'm going to be unhappy on either side.
Yeah, and that's it. I think ultimately you get stuck with holding him, you know, because you don't want to sell him for any less than 2 firsts. Nobody wants to buy him for 2 firsts, so you know he stays on your roster. But I think a lot of these CMCs obviously in a separate kind of group and a separate conversation. But I think a lot of these older running backs, ultimately, nobody wants to buy them for the price that you would want to sell them for.
Yeah.
You know, and again, I think you kind of get stuck with them in that you just have to run them into the ground, and then when they retire or basically fully fall off the fantasy cliff, then you just have to drop them, and that's the end of that. Because nobody, you know, unless Aaron Jones, you know, someone makes the playoffs and Aaron Jones is having this fantastic performance, and then one of their running backs goes down and they want someone just to fill in for the fantasy, you know, playoffs. I think that's the only time that anyone actually will give you anything decent value-wise for them. You know, other than that, nobody wants them. And I think you just get stuck with them. You know, and even CMC, even though we're saying he's a league winner, you're still stuck with him in a way. You might not want to sell him, do you know what I mean? But you did, you're still stuck with him because nobody wants to sell him for the value that you feel he has.
Yeah.
So I just find all of these aging running backs really interesting. I find aging wide receivers much easier to kind of sell, trade and sell, because people feel happier with wide receivers on the roster than these aging running backs.
Well, you kind of know that an aging wide receiver will keep it going for a few more seasons, whereas with running back, you can never be sure that an aging running back isn't going to just immediately fall off the cliff and lose all value. So I think it's just a little bit more worrying when you have that old running back on your roster that you're like, I think I'm stuck with you. Like I think I just have to keep you forever. Because no one's ever going to take you and you're going to fall apart now.
Yeah, and I just often find it really interesting when, you listen to these podcasts and they say, oh, sell Aaron Jones, you need to sell him now, this is the time to get out. And I'm like, well, yeah, I would sell him if anyone was buying him. Like,
Yeah.
advice, but nobody wants to buy him.
It's
so
such boring analysis, isn't it? That like, you should sell Derrick Henry for a first right now. Well, no one's going to. No one's gonna come and buy right now. No one's gonna buy Alvin Kamara. No one's gonna buy Josh Jacobs. Like, you are stuck with these players unless you're willing to sell very low on them.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I get annoyed with those kind of things.
Yeah.
Right, let's quickly talk about the Packers and Jordan Love. Where are you ranking Jordan Love for fantasy in 2024?
So I was looking through my dynasty rankings, but then also looking through, I haven't started putting together redraft rankings just yet, but I think the answer is going to be somewhere around the QB 9-10 range. He obviously finished a QB 6 on the year this year, which was fantastic. For me, it's just a sample size thing. Like, he's QB 9 in dynasty on Keep Trade Cut currently, but that's ahead of Trevor Lawrence and Kyler Murray, who are the other two that I have him behind. And then I have him sort of sat around the same range as Dak, Purdy, and Tua. It's just a sample size thing. Like, he's looked fantastic, but this is kind of his rookie season. And he only really came into his own second half of the season. So I wouldn't be willing to put him above kind of, either one or two spots either side of the QB 10, which I think is fantastic given, the expectations coming into the season that we're thinking about him as a QB1, but I'm not willing to kind of bet on him to repeat what he did this year.
Yeah, that's what I kind of think. So, and actually, I think it's going to be really difficult to rank him any higher than that. But I think ultimately he probably finishes higher than that on the season.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. Like, I think it's the fact that he's just happy to throw these bombs all over the field, that is going to make him like a fantasy. I do think he's a bit of a kind of fantasy darling kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately when you sit down and I can't put him above Joe Burrow, I can't put him above, Justin Herbert or whatever.
Yeah.
When you sit and look at the names, you feel like you can't put him there. But I think ultimately by the end of next season, he'll be above all of those, So I think he could be a decent value next season.
Yeah. Oh, no, I completely agree. I think he'll be drafted about the QB 10 sort of range, and I'd be quite happy with him as my QB1 in fantasy next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. The Lions. You wanted to discuss Sam Laporta, Lewis.
Yeah, very easy question. Is Sam Laporta the Dynasty Titan 1?
Yes.
Do you think?
Well, do you know what? So Travis Kelce, in my opinion, I don't think we can have him as a Titan 1 anymore. Look,
No.
he's actually played reasonably well in the playoffs. He's coming, looked like Travis Kelce, but ultimately I don't think he's going to retire at the end of the season unless they win the Super Bowl and maybe he's like, right, I'm going to go off in a high.
Yeah.
But I think he's still going to be there. I don't think he's going to be on the field as much. I think he's going to be more of a rotational piece, and I just don't think we can value him where he is now. Mark Andrews, fantastic player. I guess maybe you could say that he's the Titan 1. But for me, I just... There's something about Mark Andrews that I just can't fall in love with. And I think... I don't know if they're going to give Isaiah Likely more playing time because he's played admirably. I think whenever Mark Andrews is in, they don't. But... Yeah. I don't know. I just like Sam Laporta. I just feel like he's consistent. He is often consistently getting high fantasy scores, whereas I feel that Mark Andrews can kind of ebb and flow a little bit.
Yeah. For Mark Andrews, it's not Isaiah Likely that worries me. It's Zay Flowers. It's another weapon that kind of thrives around the middle of the field and kind of in short yardage areas. So that's kind of the bigger worry to me. The thing with Laporta, so he's my tight end too, and my tight end one is Trey McBride. Um, the big thing to me, and so that's my tier one is those two, and then you get into kind of Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, the next tier down. In the stretch where Trey McBride was a full-time starter after Zach Ertz was released, in kind of the advanced metrics, and this is coming from Rich Cooling at Dynasty Island on Twitter. In the advanced metrics, it actually wasn't hugely close. Trey McBride was higher than Sam Laporta in targets per game, receptions per game, receiving yards per game, PPR points per game, yards per route run, and targets per route run. The only thing he was lower than him on is touchdowns per game, and touchdown regression is a big thing. And I think Sam Laporta could be in for it next season. So to me, like, I also can see the Lions going and getting another player and another offensive weapon because someone that you've noted down here, Jameson Williams, like it's not going to happen. The wide receiver two, Josh Reynolds, perfectly good player, but like a more of a wide receiver 3-4 type. So I think they could go and get another weapon this offseason. And I just think that the target volume could potentially come down for Laporta and the touchdowns could come down as well. So I think it's very close. I have Trey McBride just about over him, but I mean, it's exceptional to have the rookie season that he's had. I don't being kind of finicky about who's the tight end one overall when Sam Laporta has been in the NFL for one season is pretty exceptional on its own.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think you have to have him, like you say, McBride, over these kind of aging tight ends at this point.
Yeah,
Purely because of they're at the top echelons of the tight end in terms of scoring this season, and they're also younger. So, like you say, whether you quibble over whether he's actually the one or the two, I think you'd be happy with either of those guys at this point, wouldn't you?
Yeah, completely.
Baker Mayfield, you've put a question here, Lewis, about where we think Baker would rank in Dynasty if the Bucs re-sign him to a long-term deal.
Yeah, I love Baker. I thought aside from kind of that last interception, I thought he balled out and I was really glad to see it. I really root for him after his time on the Rams, but also after, being cast aside on the Browns for a sexual abuser and then being cast aside on the Panthers. And I think he's gritty and I think he's kind of really come around with his attitude and it's good to see him succeed. To me, I have him currently as my QB 19. So that's actually just above Deshaun Watson. And I think that's about the sort of range that he should be in. But Baker had a really good season. And I think he's like a real buy this off season because I'm 100% confident that he's starting there again next season.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel a bit nervous about him because he can be very volatile, in terms of it's either going really well or it's not going, he'll throw 3 touchdowns or he'll throw 3 picks,
Yeah.
like there's kind of nothing in between. And I think I was listening to the Athletic football show today and they were saying that, they were relatively low in EPA in first and second down, but really high on third down. They were converting a lot of third downs, and some of this ultimately will fall back down to the mean. So I wouldn't be surprised if they regressed a little bit next season.
Yeah.
And I think maybe he's going to kind of fall down to earth a little bit. So I would, at QB 19, I'd be fine with that, but I wouldn't kind of be expecting too much more from him. I do think we're probably going to get some regression here.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair, especially if they lose Mike Evans.
So let's try and squeeze in our last 2 teams before we finish, Lewis. We've got about 1 minute per team. So what do you think the Chiefs are going to do at wide receiver next season?
And this is off the back of the dreadful performance by anyone who wasn't Rashee Rice and obviously Travis Kelce, starting to starting to regress. I think they have to go out and get someone. I'd love to see T. Higgins. I'd love to see Mike Williams if he's released. T. Higgins probably unaffordable and probably isn't going to be there. Mike Williams obviously in division, but I think would work really well. Even someone like Hollywood Brown. But I just think they need to go out and get someone else. I don't really care who that is, because any, Tyler Boyd as a decent slot weapon, anything's better than Mecole Hardman, Kadarius Toney, and Sky Moore.
You're trying to put a dagger through my heart, Lewis, sending Tyler Boyd
Jeez.
and T. Higgins to the Chiefs. I mean, why would you do that after we spoke for about 10 minutes at the start of the show about how much I hate them? Seeing Higgins in a Chiefs uniform jersey, that would send me over the edge. Actually, if I wasn't a Bengals supporter, I think that would be awesome to see. Higgins with Mahomes I think they'd be fantastic. But yeah, I agree, they need to get someone. They keep drafting these rookies and they're just, my understanding is Reid's system is extremely complex, and they need time to get into it now. I think ultimately Sky Moore, etc., are busts. Obviously Rashee Rice is coming on now, but I agree they need a veteran in there really to kind of steady the ship, catch the balls, and maybe they will be easily in the Super Bowl next season. So I'm interested to see what they do. Stephon Diggs, Lewis. I have no idea what's going on. He's having 3 catches for 20 yards for the past 8 games. He's been nowhere. Do you think they've fallen out? Do you think he's injured? What's going on?
I would like to see something this off season about him being injured and struggling through an injury this season. The Bills are kind of screwed, man. So the Bills are in the 4th worst cap position currently. They're currently projected 43 million over the cap for next season. Gabe Davis is a free agent, so they're losing, Khalil Shakir is okay, but the only reliable weapon outside of only reliable wide receiver outside of Diggs. Diggs, they still have 4 more years in his contract. If they cut him, it's 31 million in dead caps. They kind of just got to keep it going. And Diggs is 30. I think you need him to come out this season and be like, yeah, I've been struggling with a broken foot. I'm really going to piece it together, because I don't think people are realizing, and it makes me laugh because Brandon Beane, the general manager of the Bills, came out last offseason and was like, we're not trying to do what the Rams did because we've seen how they've ended up now. And hey, you made it 1 spot further than us, mate, and your team is way more screwed than ours. The Bills are in a really rough spot in terms of cap, and I don't like to say it because the window's open when they've got Josh Allen, but I worry that this year was supposed to be the year, and it's now going to take a little bit of time for them to piece the wide receiver core back together. Thankfully, it's a good wide receiver draft, so someone like Xavier Worthy, and they should be okay.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this can't be Diggs dropping off a cliff. I can't believe it. I think there's something going on there. As I say, whether it's that, there's a rift or an injury, there's something. I just don't believe that all of a sudden he's, this terrible player. There's something going on there. So I'm interested to see what comes out, now their season is over. Still loads to talk about, Lewis, and we're going to get to it all in the off season. There's going to be plenty of chat about this season, what's going to happen next season, fantasy implications, startup drafts, you name it, we'll have it for you. But for now, that's us for this episode, bringing us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. You know where to find us on X at Wildcard Rewind, and obviously don't forget YouTube, Fantasy Wildcard. That's where you'll get all of our videos. And my understanding is that the Devi podcast should be coming out this week, so new podcast on the network. So please go give them a listen if you want to learn about all of those college prospects. Otherwise, enjoy Championship weekend. We'll see you on the other side.